The massive black ships hung in space like death itself, their hulls reflecting no light from the distant stars. For 3,000 years, these vessels had brought the same message to every world they visited: bow down or die. The Kithran hegemony had never known defeat, never faced true resistance, never met a species that didn't eventually break under their iron will. Captain Vextai stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching another world prepare to surrender. His four eyes scanned the holographic display showing the planet. Below, another civilization ready to add their name to the endless list of the conquered. The routine had become so predictable that he barely paid attention anymore. Send the ultimatum. Wait for the inevitable plea for mercy. Accept their submission. Move on to the next world. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface, reported his communications officer, her voice carrying the same bored tone that had infected the entire crew. After destroying countless civilizations, even genocide had become mundane. Put it through, Vextai replied, not bothering to look up from his tactical reports. He expected the usual desperate leaders offering tribute, promising eternal service, begging for their people's lives. He had heard it all before, in 1,000 different languages, from 1,000 different species. But the voice that came through the speakers was different. It was calm, steady, almost conversational. The translator worked quickly to convert the alien words into Kithran. This is Admiral Kim Tae-woo of the United Earth Defense Force. We have received your ultimatum and considered your terms carefully. The human paused, and Vexti found himself actually listening for the first time in decades. Our response is simple. We decline. The bridge fell silent. Vexti's mandibles clicked in confusion as he tried to process what he had just heard. In 3 millennia of conquest, no species had ever simply declined their offer. They begged, they bargained, they threatened, they cried, but they never just said no. Repeat that transmission, Vexti ordered, certain his translator had malfunctioned. We decline your terms, the human voice repeated, still maddeningly calm. We will not submit to your empire, and we will not allow you to harm our people. If you wish to try, you are welcome to attempt it. We will be waiting. The transmission ended, leaving the Kithran bridge in stunned silence. Vexti stared at the communication console as if it had personally insulted his ancestors. His tactical officer, a veteran of hundreds of campaigns, looked equally bewildered. Sir, perhaps they misunderstood the ultimatum, suggested the communications officer. Should we transmit it again more clearly? Vexti's eyes narrowed as he studied the planet below. These humans were obviously primitive. Their ships were crude metal constructs held together with what appeared to be controlled explosions. Their weapons were simple kinetic projectiles, barely more advanced than throwing rocks. Yet something about their response unsettled him. Show me their fleet, he commanded. The holographic display shifted to show the human ships arranged in defensive positions around their homeworld. They were pathetically small compared to Kithran dreadnoughts, but their formation was ... interesting. Instead of clustering together for mutual protection, like every other species did, they had spread out in complex patterns that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. Sir, they have perhaps 200 vessels, reported the tactical officer. Our fleet number's over 3,000. This will be the shortest resistance in recorded history. But Vexti wasn't so sure. Something about the human formation nagged. At him, it reminded him of hunting patterns he had studied during his military education, not the desperate clustering of prey, but the methodical positioning of predators. Scan their ships more carefully, he ordered. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. The sensor readings came back quickly, and they were even more confusing than the human's response had been. The ships were indeed primitive, but they were also heavily armed and showed signs of recent modification. More importantly, the energy signatures from their reactors suggested they were running at barely 20% capacity. Why would they be running their reactors so low during a battle? Vexti wondered aloud. His tactical officer studied the readings with growing concern. Sir, if they're only using 20% power for normal operations, that means they're saving the other 80% for something else, Vexti finished. For the first time in his long military career, He felt something he had never experienced before when facing an enemy: doubt. The humans had done something no other species had managed in 3,000 years. They had made the Kithrin hegemony uncertain. They had introduced an unknown variable into an equation that had always had the same answer. As Vextai prepared to give the order to attack, he found himself wondering if perhaps the humans knew something that the mighty Kithrin Empire had somehow missed. The thought was absurd, impossible, heretical, but it was there, nagging at the back of his mind like a splinter he couldn't remove. Down on the planet's surface, Admiral Kim Tae-woo watched the alien fleet through his command center's massive view screen. His staff officers waited quietly for orders, their faces calm but alert. They had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment, and now it had finally arrived. "Sir, they're moving into attack formation," reported his tactical officer. Tae-woo nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the display. "Good. Now we find out what humans are really made of." The Catharan fleet moved forward like a wall of death, their massive ships blocking out the stars behind them. Captain Vextai watched his tactical display, his growing confidence, as 3,000 warships advanced on the pitiful human defense force. This would be over quickly, just like every other conquest in the past 3,000 years. "Begin the attack," he commanded, settling back in his command chair. Standard formation. Destroy their fleet, then prepare for planetary bombardment. The first wave of Kithrin energy weapons lit up space with deadly light. Brilliant beams of plasma and particle energy reached across the void toward the human ships. Every weapon hit its target perfectly. The Kithrins had been perfecting their aim for millennia. But something was wrong. The human ships didn't explode. They didn't break apart. They didn't even seem badly damaged. Instead, they did something that made Vextai's blood run cold. They started moving faster. "What just happened?" Vextai demanded, leaning forward in his chair. His tactical officer stared at the readings in confusion. "Sir, it appears their ships absorbed our energy weapons and converted the power to their engines. They're using our attacks to make themselves stronger." Before Vextai could respond, the human fleet opened fire. But these weren't energy weapons like the Kithrins used. These were chunks of metal moving at incredible speed, launched from what looked like primitive railguns. The Kithrin shields, designed to deflect energy attacks, did nothing to stop solid projectiles. The first human salvo punched through the shields of 6 Kithrin cruisers like they were made of paper. The kinetic rounds tore through hull plating that had never been penetrated by any known weapon. 3 ships exploded instantly. The other 3 began spinning helplessly, their control systems destroyed. Captain Lee Minho commanded the human Destroyer Defiant, one of the smallest ships in the fleet. His crew watched in amazement as their simple railgun rounds devastated ships 50 times their size. "Sir, we just destroyed a Kithrin heavy cruiser with 1 shot," reported his weapons officer, Lieutenant Park So-young. "Don't celebrate yet," Lee replied, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "We've got 3,000 more to go." The human fleet began to move in ways that made no sense to Kithrin military doctrine. Instead of staying in formation, they scattered like seeds in the wind. Each ship moved independently, following patterns that seemed random but somehow worked together. The Kithrins tried to target them, but the humans were already somewhere else by the time the weapons fired. Commander Choi Hanul piloted her fighter squadron through the gaps between the massive alien ships. Her pilots followed her lead, using the Kithrins' own size against them. The huge alien vessels couldn't turn fast enough to track the nimble human fighters, and their weapons were too powerful. They risked destroying their own ships if they fired at targets so close to their hulls. "This is insane," muttered one of her pilots as they dove between two Kithrin dreadnoughts. "We're like mosquitoes attacking elephants." "Yeah," Honol replied, lining up her next target. "But even elephants can be brought down if you know where to sting them." Her missiles struck the connection point between the 2 alien ships, causing a chain reaction that disabled both vessels. The humans had studied every piece of Kithrin technology they could find, learning the weaknesses that 3,000 years of easy victories had hidden. Back on the Kithrin flagship, panic was starting to set in. Vexti watched in horror as his massive fleet began to fall apart. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were being destroyed by vessels that looked like they were built in a scrapyard. How is this possible? He demanded.
Our weapons?
Are more advanced. Our ships are larger. Our technology is superior. His science officer, trembling with fear, provided an answer that chilled everyone on the bridge. I believe they've been studying us. Every battle we've fought, every tactic we've used, every weakness we've shown, they've been watching and learning. They know everything about us, but we know nothing about them. The truth was even worse than the science officer suspected. Humanity had indeed been watching the Kithran hegemony for decades through hidden sensors and captured data. They had studied every battle, analyzed every tactic, and prepared countermeasures for every possible scenario. But more than that, they had done something the Kithrans had never encountered before. They had prepared to fight a war they expected to lose. Every human ship was designed to do maximum damage, even if destroyed. Every tactic was planned to hurt the enemy, even in defeat. Every weapon was built to punch above its weight class. The humans hadn't just prepared to fight the Kithran hegemony, they had prepared to make them pay dearly for every victory. Admiral Kim Tae-woo watched the battle from his command center, his face calm despite the chaos surrounding his planet. His staff officers coordinated the defense with practiced efficiency, treating the alien invasion like a complex but solvable problem. "Sir, we're receiving surrender requests from several Kithran ships," reported his communications officer. Tae-woo raised an eyebrow. "Surrender requests from them?" "Yes, sir. It appears they've never faced an enemy that fought back effectively. Their crews don't know how to handle heavy casualties." The admiral allowed himself a small smile. "Interesting. Oh, very interesting. Indeed, in space above Earth, the impossible was happening." The mighty Kithran hegemony, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, was losing a battle for the first time in 3,000 years. And they were learning a lesson that would echo across the galaxy. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is underestimating someone who has nothing left to lose. The space around Earth had become a graveyard of twisted metal and burning ships. But these weren't human vessels. They were the remains of the mighty Kitharan fleet, scattered like broken toys across the void. Captain Vextai stared at his tactical display in disbelief as another of his dreadnoughts exploded under human fire. "This is impossible," he whispered, watching his 3,000-year-old empire crumble before his eyes. "We are the Kithran hegemony. We do not lose battles." But the humans were teaching him a harsh lesson about the difference between winning battles and winning wars. These primitive creatures fought with a cold intelligence that chilled him to his core. They didn't fight like desperate animals backed into a corner. They fought like predators who had been waiting their entire lives for this moment. Commander Jung Woo-jin led his marine boarding parties through the corridors of captured Kithran ships. His soldiers moved with deadly precision, their simple ballistic weapons proving devastatingly effective against aliens who had grown soft from centuries of easy conquest. The Kithrans had energy shields that could stop plasma beams, but they did nothing against old-fashioned bullets. "Target the reactor core," Jung ordered his demolition specialist, Sergeant Kim Dobbin. "Make it quick and clean." Dobbin nodded, planting charges with the efficiency of someone who had done this dozens of times before. The humans had turned captured enemy ships into weapons themselves, using them as massive bombs to destroy entire formations of Kithran vessels. "Sir, why don't we try to keep these ships intact?" asked one of the younger Marines. "We could use their technology." Jong smiled grimly as he watched the alien crew surrender without a fight, because fear is more valuable than technology, soldier. When the other ships see this one explode, they'll start to doubt. And doubt is how we win this war. The explosion lit up space like a new star, visible from the bridge of every Kithran ship still fighting. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. These aliens had spent 3,000 years believing they were unstoppable. Now they were watching their most powerful vessels being destroyed by beings they considered primitives. Captain Sung Mi-rae commanded the human carrier Indomitable, coordinating fighter strikes against the larger Kithran ships. Her pilots used tactics that would have been impossible for any other species. They were willing to die to complete their missions. But more importantly, they were smart enough to survive. "Dragon Squadron, I want you to hit the command ships." "Communication array," she ordered. "Phoenix Squadron, take out their long-range sensors. Make them blind and deaf. Lieutenant Yoon Ha-jin led Dragon Squadron in a diving attack that used the planet's gravity well to increase their speed. Her fighters screamed through the Kithran formation like bullets, too fast for the alien point defense systems to track. The communication array disappeared in a ball of fire, cutting the Kithran flagship off from the rest of its fleet. But the humans weren't content to simply destroy their enemies. They had learned something from studying the Kithran Empire, that the aliens themselves had forgotten the power of turning enemies against each other. Major Tendaji ran the Psychological Warfare Division from a hidden bunker deep beneath Earth's surface. Her team broadcast carefully crafted messages on Kithran military frequencies, messages designed to spread panic and confusion through the alien fleet. "Attention Kithran vessels," her voice said in perfect alien language. "Your commanders have been lying to you. The humans are not primitive. They've been watching you, studying you, learning your weaknesses for decades. You are not fighting savages, you are fighting an enemy that knows you better than you know yourselves." The effect was immediate. Several Kithran ships began firing on each other, their crews convinced that they had been infiltrated by human agents. Others broke formation and tried to flee, only to run straight into carefully positioned human ambushes. Colonel Bae Yoon-ji commanded the stealth operations that had been the key to human victory. For months before the invasion, her teams had infiltrated Kithran supply lines, planting listening devices and gathering intelligence. When the alien fleet arrived, the humans knew exactly where to hit them. "Sir, the enemy is trying to retreat," reported her intelligence officer, Captain Osubin. "Let them," Yoon-ji replied calmly. "But make sure they carry our message back to their empire. Let them tell everyone what happens when you pick a fight with humanity." The retreat became a rout as human ships pursued the fleeing Kithrans, destroying any vessel that moved too slowly. But they weren't just fighting a battle, they were sending a message to the entire galaxy. General Nam Ho-jin watched the tactical display from his command center, seeing the bigger picture that individual ship. Captains couldn't grasp. The humans hadn't just defended their world, they had shattered the myth of Kitherian invincibility that had kept 1,000 species in chains. "Sir, we're receiving communications from across the galaxy," reported his aide. "Dozens of species that were conquered by the hegemony are asking for our help." Nam Ho-jin nodded slowly. This battle had been just the beginning. The humans had proven that the Kithrans could be beaten, and now every oppressed world in the galaxy would be watching to see what happened next, in the depths of space. The last Kithran ships limped away from Earth, carrying with them the seeds of their empire's destruction. They had learned that there was something far more dangerous than superior technology or overwhelming numbers, the determination of a species that refused to kneel. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity didn't just know how to fight, they knew how to win. The news traveled faster than light across the galaxy, carried by Kithran survivors who stumbled into starports with wild stories that no one wanted to believe. The mighty hegemony, rulers of 3,000 worlds, had been defeated by a species most aliens had never even heard of. In the dark corners of slave colonies and conquered worlds, whispers began to spread like wildfire. Commander Bae Yoon-ji stood in the shadows of a Kithran supply depot on the planet Zarian, watching alien workers load weapons onto transport ships. Her team had been operating behind enemy lines for weeks, gathering intelligence and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The humans had learned something important from their victory at Earth. Fear was contagious, and they intended to spread it throughout the galaxy. "Team leaders, report," she whispered into her communicator. "Alpha team in position," came the reply from Sergeant Park Min-ho. "Charges are set on the main reactor." "Bravo team ready," reported Lieutenant Kim. "Gyu, we've got eyes on the command center." Yoon-ji smiled in the darkness. The Kithrans had spent so long being the hunters that they had forgotten how to watch for predators. Their security was designed to keep slaves from escaping, not to stop trained soldiers from getting in. "Execute in 3, 2, 1, ... Now." Explosion lit up the night sky as the weapons depot disappeared in a ball of fire. But more importantly, every Kithran within 100 kilometers received the same message broadcast on all frequencies. "The humans are coming. Run." Halfway across the galaxy, Captain Song Murray led a strike force of 30 human ships through hyperspace, heading for the Kithrin military base at Kepler Station. Her fleet was tiny compared to the forces that had defended Earth, but size didn't matter anymore. The humans had learned to fight smart, not hard. "Captain, we're detecting a Kithrin patrol fleet ahead," reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Choi Hanel. "How many ships?" Song asked, studying the sensor readings. 12. "Heavy cruisers, sir. They outnumber us 4-1. Song smiled. "Perfect. Send them a message. Tell them we're here to discuss their surrender." The Kithrin patrol commander, Captain Zekmer, received the human transmission with a mixture of rage and fear. These primitive creatures had the audacity to demand his surrender? But as he looked at his tactical display, doubt crept into his mind. Every ship captain in the fleet had heard the stories from Earth. The humans were dangerous in ways that traditional military thinking couldn't explain. "Sir, orders," asked his weapons officer. Zekmer hesitated. His fleet was larger and more heavily armed than the human force, but numbers hadn't helped at Earth. The humans seemed to have an answer for every Kithrin advantage, and they fought with a ruthless intelligence that terrified veteran warriors. "Open a channel," he said finally. "Let's hear what they have to say." The human captain's voice was calm and professional, like someone discussing the weather. "Captain Zekmer, your empire's finished. The question is whether you want to be part of what comes next, or whether you want to join the wreckage floating around Earth." "You're bluffing," Zekmer replied, but his voice lacked conviction.
Us.
30 ships cannot defeat 12 cruisers." "You're right," the human agreed. 30 ships can't defeat 12 cruisers. But we're not here to defeat you. We're here to give you a choice." Before Zekmer could respond, his sensors detected movement. 3 more human fleets had just dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding his patrol from all sides. The trap had been perfectly executed, and he had walked right into it. On the liberated world of Selim, Captain Jung Woo-jin stood before a crowd of freed slaves, representing 17 different species. The Kithrins had used this planet as a mining colony for centuries, working the native population to death in the underground tunnels. Now the chains were broken, and the former slaves were learning to hope again. "The hegemony told you that. Resistance was futile," Jung said, his words translated into dozens of languages. "They were wrong. Resistance isn't futile. It's inevitable. It's what separates the living from the dead." A Zelenite elder stepped forward, his ancient eyes bright with tears. "Human warrior, my people have been slaves for 800 years. We had forgotten what freedom felt like. How can we ever repay you?" Jung shook his head. "You don't repay us. You help us. Every world we liberate, every chain we break, makes the galaxy a little bit safer for everyone. The Kithrins ruled through fear, but we're going to replace that fear with hope." The psychological impact was spreading faster than any military campaign could have achieved. Major Shindahe's information warfare teams were broadcasting human victories across the galaxy, showing enslaved populations that their oppressors could be beaten. The effect was devastating to Kithrin morale. On Kithra Prime, the hegemony's capital world, High Command struggled to maintain control as reports of defeats poured in from across their empire. General Wachter stared at the strategic display, watching red markers appear on world after world as human forces struck without warning. "How many fleets have we lost?" he asked his aide. 17 confirmed. "Destroyed, sir. Another 31 have reported human contact and are requesting reinforcements." Wachter's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Where are these humans getting their ships? Intelligence reports suggest they only had a few hundred vessels at Earth." What the Kithrins didn't understand was that the humans weren't just fighting with ships, they were fighting with ideas. Every species they liberated became a potential ally. Every victory inspired others to rebel. Every Kithrin defeat weakened the Empire's grip on power. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were learning that being prey was a very different experience from being predators. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was writing the new rules with fire and blood. The siege of Cathara Prime began at dawn on the 3rd day of the galactic month, when Admiral Park Sung-woo's combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace above the hegemony's capital world. But this wasn't the same human force that had defended Earth months earlier. This fleet contained ships from dozens of species, former slaves who had joined the fight against their oppressors. High Commander Voctor stood on the bridge of the last Kithran super dreadnought. Watching the impossible sight of his former subjects preparing to attack him, Zelenite cruisers flew alongside human destroyers. Mantheri fighters escorted Terran bombers. The galaxy had turned against the Kithrans, and there was nowhere left to run. "Sir, they're broadcasting on all frequencies," reported his communications officer, her voice shaking with fear. "Put it through," Voctor ordered, though he already knew what he would hear. The voice that filled the bridge belonged to Fleet Admiral Lim Soyoung, the human commander who had become known throughout the galaxy as the Liberator. Her words were calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. "High Commander Voctor, this is Admiral Lim. Your empire is finished. Your fleets are scattered or destroyed. Your worlds have chosen freedom over tyranny. I am offering you one final chance to surrender with honor." Voctor's mandibles clicked in bitter laughter. "Honor? You speak of honor while leading an alliance of slaves against their rightful masters?" "I speak of honor while offering you more mercy than you ever showed others," Lim replied. "You have 1 hour to decide. Surrender and your people will be treated fairly. Continue to fight, and we will do what we must to end this war." The hour passed in silence as Voctor stared at his tactical displays. His remaining ships were vastly outnumbered, his people were terrified, and his empire was crumbling around him. For 3,000 years, the Kithrans had believed they were destined to rule the galaxy. They were learning what it felt like to be conquered. "All ships, this is High Commander Voctor," he finally broadcast. "Stand down. Surrender too." The Allied forces' formal surrender ceremony took place in the Great Hall of the Kithran Imperial Palace, a massive structure that had once symbolized eternal dominance. Now it served as the birthplace of something entirely new, a galaxy where no single species would ever again hold absolute power. Captain Osubin, presenting the human diplomatic corps, stood across from the Kithran delegation as the surrender documents were signed. The aliens looked broken, their proud bearing replaced by the hollow stare of the defeated. But there was something else in their eyes: relief. "What happens to us now?" asked former High Commander Voctor, his voice barely above a whisper. "Depends on you," O replied. "The new Galactic Federation has a place for every species, including yours. But you'll have to earn that place through actions, not words." The treaty negotiations took weeks, with representatives from hundreds of worlds gathering to create something that had never existed before: a truly democratic galactic government. Ambassador Park Min-ji, the woman who had first defied the Kithran ultimatum, found herself chairing the Constitutional Convention. "We're not here to create another empire," she told the assembled delegates. "We're here to make sure that what happened under the hegemony can never happen again." The Zelenite elder, who had been freed from the mining world of Selim, raised his hand to speak. "Ambassador Park, my people have been slaves for 8 centuries. How do we know this federation won't become just another form of tyranny?" "Because you're here," Park replied simply. "Because every species has a voice. Because power will be shared, not hoarded. And because humanity has learned something important. The strongest civilizations are built on cooperation, not conquest." General Nam Ho-jin addressed the first session of the Galactic Assembly from the podium, where Kithran emperors had once issued their decrees. Around him sat representatives from species that had been enemies for millennia, now working together. "To build a better future, the age of empire is over," he declared. "The age of partnership begins today. We didn't fight this war to replace one master with another. We fought it so that no one would ever have to kneel again." The cheers that erupted from the assembly hall could be heard across the galaxy, broadcast to every world that had ever suffered under Kithran rule. On planets where children had grown up knowing only slavery, schools were built. On worlds where speaking against the government meant death, voices were raised in song. The galaxy was learning to hope again. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Admiral Lim Soyoung met privately with former High Commander Voctor in the palace. Gardens. The Kithran military leader looked older, his once proud bearing replaced by something resembling humility. Why? He asked simply. Why didn't you destroy us when you had the chance? Why offer us a place in your federation? Lim smiled, looking up at the stars that no longer trembled in fear. Because the strongest thing you can do to an enemy isn't to destroy them, it's to turn them into an ally. Your people have skills, knowledge, and experience that the galaxy needs. The question is whether you're willing to use those gifts to build instead of destroy. The stars that had once been ruled by fear now shone with possibility. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity had made sure it would never want to be. The age of the hegemony was over, and the age of the Federation had begun.